Hello, everyone. As you know, this meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to public internet. So chances are whatever you say will remain here for a very long time. With that, let's start our meeting. We have a few items on the agenda. Let's go with the same order as we have them in the notes. The first item is an update on physical host, the topology that we were trying to add. I think, Abdullah, I think I should let you speak and give us the update. You have the full story. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so Aldo was driving this effort. So he put up a KEP, and the KEP had like lots of discussion from both SIG ARC and the SIG cloud provider. We didn't see a lot of enthusiasm there. Actually, there wasn't a single supporter apart from us trying to actually push this forward. The main problem there is basically what does it mean to add a new label, and the fact that those labels basically are turning into APIs, which is not ideal. And that we already have a couple of labels called like zone and region. Those, they don't have specific semantics what they mean, and they can be used to define basically two levels of topologies, and basically on-prem providers should adapt them to their infrastructure as they wish. That's not ideal, but I think we can adapt to that by changing a little bit the scheduler behavior. The main problem is that those are being used in the default spreading for the scheduler. So basically the scheduler by default distributes pods across zones. And if an on-prem setup wants to distribute pods across physical hosts, they'll have to use the zone as the zone. They'll have to use the zone label as a physical host, and then they have to use the region label to indicate, for example, different tracks, which simulates the setup on an actual on-cloud setup. But if they do that, then they will not get the default spreading of pods across zones that the scheduler does. So the idea here is to pass in a flag or a configuration to the scheduler to alter this default spreading behavior to allow for spreading across regions as well.
Or alternatively, we can actually add a config section to the scheduler so that one can define what is the hierarchy of any arbitrary label that they want pods to spread among. So for example, one could say, my first level is node, second level is zone, third level is region.
Right.
I mean, we don't need to go more than 3 levels, I guess, at this point. But a possible alternative is to just start with known labels, as you said, but I think there is no reason really to stick with the known labels. We can just go with any arbitrary label and let people define whatever label they want. This will be useful because I remember that there was this discussion that some people were asking if they can spread pods among racks. And we said, we don't have any label for racks. So how do you want to do it by default? And I guess if we go and add a feature similar to what I just described, of course, there is a possibility that one can, especially with pod spreading, one could possibly go and say, I want my pods to be spread using this particular label, and I'm given this particular label among whatever topology that I want. But the problem is that then all users must put those labels in their pod spec. Some companies or users that I've heard from, they prefer not to add this to all their pod specs. They just basically want to have a default behavior for everything. And this is useful because it gives them workload portability. For example, if they have certain set of labels in one cluster and they don't have the same set of labels for the nodes in another cluster, they can still use the same pod spec or in one cluster and move it to another cluster and just change the configuration of the scheduler in another cluster. And everything just works. They don't need to change the configuration of all the pods and all the workloads in every cluster. So this is going to be useful. I think it's going to be useful. We can definitely target this for 117 to add something like this, to the scheduler configuration to basically define a set of labels. As I said, it does not necessarily need to be more than 3 levels. In fact, today we only support 2 levels in the scheduler. First level is node and second level is zone. We don't have to stick to those well-defined labels. We can just make it more configurable. And I think I like your idea of configurability of these labels.
So Aldo will be creating an issue and trying to drive this forward for 117, since he already started working basically on the physical hosting, and basically this evolved from that.
Yes. I think I actually like this evolution over the original proposal or original feature that we were targeting. This is going to be even better, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, it's true.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad that at least something good came out of this. All right, is there any question about this feature or any comments? Okay. If there's nothing, let's move on to the next item. Next item is about an update on the scheduling framework. As far as I can tell, I hope I'm not missing anything. There are only 2 extension points left to be done. One is post filter plugins, and the other one is normalize the score, which is sort of like post score plugins. So these 2 post things are left to be done, and both of them have PRs. Both of them are kind of close to a state that we can probably measure them soon, but especially the normalize the score one needs a little bit more thinking. And I know that there has been some discussion about changing our approach and the original design that we proposed in the scheduling framework KEP. Abdullah, maybe you can tell us more about that and what your proposal is.
Yeah, so the idea is to really fuse them, fuse the normalized score and score together. And probably Chong, I think he's on the call as well, can comment as well on what we are trying to do, because he's basically driving that PR.
Right. Yes, sure. So right now, the score and normalized score plugins are enabled by 2 separate plugin set lists, just as any other plugins. They're kind of treated independently in that sense. But the real problem is there's an expectation that when you normalize the score, there is always like the same plugin that has a score method. So you normalize the results from the score method. So it's a bit confusing in the sense that, like, I have a normalized score plugin. How should I enable that? Should I put the plugin in both the normalized score and the score list, or just one of them? So the proposal is just consolidate 2 lists into one, just one score plugin list, and the normalized score method is treated as like an optional interface method that can be implemented by a score plugin, but by default you don't have to. So when we read that list, we can check, okay, so if this score plugin also implements normalized score, okay, we're gonna put that in a normalized score internal list and then run normalized score after score. Otherwise, we basically think, okay, so you don't have normalized score, and we just ignore that. Yeah. So I think this is a much cleaner user interface to avoid any confusions.
I agree with you. Honestly, after this was implemented and after your first PR came out and I looked at it, I also felt the same, that our current user interface or UI is a little bit awkward, in the sense that, as you pointed out in the config, all our normalized scores must also be an associated score plugin with the same name and all. So yes, I agree with you. It makes sense to me. The only limitation of this new approach compared to the previous one is the fact that someone cannot directly disable and normalize the score in the config file. Right. So the config cannot, basically, if they want to disable and normalize the score, they have to go in the code and remove score implementation. Exactly. But I don't think it's a big deal, really, in terms of usability of the scheduler. It's probably something that is not, I mean, disabling and normalizes score without disabling the whole score plugin is probably something not very commonly needed feature, in my opinion.
Right.
I might be proven wrong in the future, and if that happens, we can definitely revisit this and maybe enable it as a separate plugin again in the future, change it. But yeah, at this point, I agree with you. This new approach is cleaner, makes more sense, and if you look at the config file for the scheduler, it feels more natural. The flow is more natural compared to if you compare it with other plugins, and we don't need to make any sort of like exceptional rules for this particular normalized score plugins. Yeah, I agree with that. Please go ahead and make changes as necessary to the PR to make this happen. We don't have to necessarily combine the removal of a normalizer score plugin from the config file in the same PR that you've sent. It's up to you. You can remove it in a separate PR. But I guess that PR should probably get merged sooner than or before your implementation of the score plugins.
Sounds good. I already have that, like the change in the PR. I ran into some issues with, with code generation, but once I fix that, I should be able to.
Okay. The code generation work for you eventually after you ran make update, or?
I haven't finished it because I just arrived at home and tried that.
I know it's not perfect timing for you guys on the East Coast. All right. Sounds good. Is there any question about this particular our scheduling framework in general? Otherwise, if there's nothing, we can move on to the next.
I have a plan to try to go through all the predicates and priorities and basically come up with a document for a roadmap of really migrating to the framework. I don't know if you had that in mind or you had any plans before. Just
I know. I mean, the only thing that I knew is that we want to do it.
Okay.
But I don't have any particular plan. You're right. We should probably think about it more carefully, and maybe there needs to be. I don't know for sure, but maybe there is a need for having a particular order in which we're converting these. But whether there is such a need or not is something that we should think about, and we should actually study and see if there is.
So I'll take that as an action item. I'll try to write at least maybe it turns out just a one pager or something. It's a plan to migrate to the framework, and maybe looking at each predicate and see what each predicate maps to in terms of plugins as well. Because some predicates or priority functions are not going to just map to a single plugin, right? They will have.
Yes.
They might map to multiple ones.
There could be, yes. Also, there is a chance that a couple of these predicates and priorities sometimes may be converted into a single plugin with multiple extension points. So that is also a possibility.
This is what I mean, actually. Yeah.
All right. Anything from other folks regarding the scheduling framework? All right. Next item is ways work. Even pod spreading, one of our most important features for 1.16. So I'm glad that it's moving forward. Of course, the API part, which was the bigger blocker, is now merged, and following that, there are 3 other PRs which were merged as well. Thank you very much for all of you folks who contributed code, particularly Ray, and also you folks who reviewed these PRs. These are, I know that there is a lot of complex algorithms involved in these PRs, and thank you very much. I was not much involved with the more recent ones, the 3 other ones, but you did a great job there. Ray, do you have any further updates for us?
No, just to echo your comments, to shout out to the reviewers. They spend tremendous efforts on reviewing the things like Abdullah, like Aldo, and the other guys. I just forgot the name. And yeah, recent change on the feature implementation is that we respect the constraints, individual constraint, independently. So that is a behavior change. And beyond that, I think all the things going well. And there are 2 PRs to go. One is the priority, one is the integration test. So we are, yeah.
Almost there. Almost there.
Almost there. Yes.
Okay, that's great. And we haven't hit the feature freeze deadline or enhancement freeze deadline yet. So this is great. We have plenty of soak time for the feature, and now I guess our confidence is pretty high that we can have this feature with very, very little worries about like reverting it in 1.16. So that's great. I'm excited about this. Thank you very much for your help. All right. One more item that I have to talk about is something that Raven has been involved with. So if you remember, we were trying to remove critical pod annotation. This was an annotation which added in, I believe, Kubernetes 1.5, which is a relatively old Kubernetes from a few years ago. At the time, there was no priority and preemption in Kubernetes, so there was no way of telling the control plane that a pod is critical. Please do not remove it or always admit it. So because there was no priority at the time, this particular annotation was added to the system. It was an experimental alpha, but given that there was no other alternative, it was enabled by default in many cloud providers and in our cluster bring up scripts and all, and our control plane was respecting it. We tried recently to remove this, and we ran into a problem because the static pods were getting rejected by the kubelet if they didn't have this particular annotation. The problem with the static pods is that despite the fact that they have a priority class name, these pods are created directly on nodes. Right? So someone can, for example, SSH to a node and bring up a static pod. And then once this happens, a pod object as a result of this is created on the API server. So this pod is created on the node first, and then as in retrospect, a pod object is created on the API server. So what happens is that if that actual pod has a priority class name, it does not have the priority integer value populated at the time it's created, because we populate that when the pod object is created on the API server. API server has these admission plugins that are executed when certain objects are created. We have this priority admission plugin that is responsible for resolving the priority class name into its integer value and populating it for pods. This works well for all pods, but not for static pods, because in static pods, things happen in reverse order. So what was happening was that when static pods are created, they don't have any integer value, and when they go through kubelet admission plugin or admission phase, kubelet admission does not know them as critical. It's because they don't have any priority. And they were sometimes kubelet were rejecting these pods because, for example, the node didn't have enough resources. So this caused some issues for some of the users, and they reported it. So we had to revert removal of the annotation, critical path annotation, so that we could still consider these static paths as critical. And then we had a meeting with SIG node folks to find a solution for this. The outcome of that meeting was that SIG node told us that it's better to consider all the static paths as critical, because these are normally paths that are created by the cluster bring up scripts. We normally don't use static paths, and it's not recommended to use static paths for anything other than paths that are created by cluster bring up. So it's kind of reasonable to think that all of those paths are critical, and that was the decision. So far we're trying to implement this in the kubelet. There is a PR out, and hopefully after this PR is merged, we will be able to resubmit the removal of critical path annotation.
Yeah, I have some background at this. So in terms of static path, I think if you don't specify the critical path annotation, for example, you specify the priority class as system cluster critical. Yes. I think I had a PR fixing the issue that Kubernetes cannot recognize the path as a system critical path because of the mirror path, or there are two copies of the path, right? One is the in-place path, which is created from the manifest, and the other one is created in the API server. So API server, the one has the admission control, so that value was populated right. But for the node copy from the manifest, they don't have the value set. But every time they just check the path on the node created from the manifest. So I had a PR fixing this kind of issue. So it's not that related with the annotation, but just to let you know, there is.
How do you fix it? What's your fix?
So how they recognize the mirror path is that they put an annotation there says created by API server, blah, blah, blah. So basically, like that PR is combiningly check the spec of the mirror path and the in-place path. Yeah. So they combine check whether it's
your fix might work, but unfortunately, I don't think it will resolve the issue that we have. Because there is a chance that the path that is created on the node goes through admission, kubelet admission, before the mirror pod is created. So there is a race between creation of mirror pod and getting the mirror pod updates on the node and the pod going through the admission logic of kubelet. So if the mirror pod is not created yet, or if we haven't received the updates for the mirror pod yet on the kubelet side, and the actual pod goes through the admission phase of kubelet, it will get rejected. So your fix is useful, but in this particular case, I guess it's not gonna help as much. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, these are all the items that I have on the agenda. We have 4 more minutes in this meeting. If other folks have questions, comments, they want PR reviews, please say something now.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes.
So for the 1.16 release, should I just update the cap for resource bin packing to like point it out to 1.16 over there, or it's going to get picked up?
So usually we have an enhancement bug or issue for these features, right? Have you pointed there that this is targeted for 1.16?
Yeah, I've updated that. Yeah.
Okay. And is it being tracked?
Oh, so somebody pinged me on that issue itself, like, is it going to be tracked? So I said yes on that. So I think it should be tracked, yeah.
Okay, and then your KEP is implementable state.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
That's correct.
So yeah, make sure that your KEP is merged and is implementable state. Otherwise, they will drop it from 1.16. And so make sure that I can also check, but you can do the same thing. Basically, make sure that on your enhancement issue, it has like tracked label.
Okay, yeah, I'll check that.
Yeah. By the way, are you getting reviews? Because I'm not actively reviewing your PRs. Is your PR or PR is being reviewed?
Yes, I think Abdullah's reviewed it, and I addressed his comments lately, and I think most of the comments are addressed except for the one which was related to a method which I am not using in my, so I just moved it to another file where it was being used. So I don't have much ideas about that, except other than that, most of the comments are addressed.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, Abdullah, for doing your reviews. Sounds great. We can, of course, chat offline, or you can chat offline with Abdullah on addressing this last comment if you have more questions about that. But it's great that you're getting timely reviews. Any other questions or comments?
There's one. So I brought up the brainstorming issues on the feature gate versus some internal state of the predicates and priority last week. I think I list 4 issues, and I gave one solution, one of the 4. So then might need someone to take a look. So basically, it's that there is a function called apply feature gate, and but it doesn't. So basically, that if that function is enabled in a real cluster, like in a when you run a scheduler, you enable, that's fine. But sometimes that function is called in an integration test. Then you actually don't revert the state at the end of your integration test. That can bring some trouble. So in the before, the issue doesn't show up. It's because some integration tests enable, some doesn't. And it happens to be that the one with lower alpha case to not enable that happens in the first, and then those ones enable happen after that, then the issue doesn't show up. But recently, when I write the integration test for the even path spread, even the letter E comes first, so that enables first, but doesn't revert back. So
that's odd. So yeah.
Yeah. So that you can take a look. So I just
sure.
It's a little like the pattern that Legit introduced in the feature gate.
Yeah.
So that I return back a function to revert to give you the choice to revert all the states back in the beginning of when you call the function.
Yeah. Exactly. So I remember that Jordan created that kind of pattern of calling a function to set the feature gate to a particular value, and that function returns a function that you put in differ, and so that function is called to basically revert back.
For our scenarios, for end-to-end test or for a real cluster, especially for the CMD scheduler set /CMD, you don't need to call the callback because you enable that, then enable. That's down. But for other tests, unit tests, the integration test, you must to call the callback.
Yeah. All right, makes sense. Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments? You're officially out of time as well. So thank you very much all for attending. I'll see you folks next week. Bye.